We are at the Panzermuseum Munster today and we look at a failed tank destroyer design, the so-called RSO Pak. RSO is short for Raupenschlepper Ost, Caterpillar Tractor East, and Pak, well, is Panzerabwehrkanone, or in English, anti-tank gun. So this was a merge of the Raupenschlepper Ost with the 75mm anti-tank gun. And if you look at the vehicle, you might dismiss it immediately, but it is a bit more complicated because Jentz and Doyle cite a report that seems very contradictory at first.
Although the Pak 40 of RSO can be immediately brought into action and is maneuverable, it has been a complete failure. So a bit of a development background. In early war, the 37mm Pak was the standard German anti-tank weapon. It had good tactic mobility, meaning the crew could move it around rather simply, since it had only a weight of about 450 kg combat weight. The main issue was its penetration was already too low against the French tanks in 1940, and in 1941 against the T-34 and KV-1 it was completely outclassed. At that point there was also the 50mm Pak in action. Although not the perfect weapon to engage Soviet tanks, it clearly was the better option. The only problem was that it had more than double the weight with 986 kg. The next anti-tank weapon in line was the 75mm Pak 40. It could deal with both the T-34 and KVs, but it had a combat weight of 1425 kg, which limited its tactical mobility significantly. Hence, the Artillery Design Office noted in September 1943, Panzerabwehr anti-tank experience reports continuously complain that because of its weight, that the schweren Panzerjaegerkanonen motor-towed can't be moved by the crew on the battlefield. Changing the firing positions and moving short stretches can only be done with assistance from towing vehicles that must first be brought forward. In addition to loss of time, changing positions under enemy fire usually results in the loss of men and equipment. Easy maneuverability in combat is a requirement that must be demanded for any towed pack with limited traverse associated with its Spreizlafette, the split trails. Since the Raupenschlepper Ost was already used as a towing vehicle for the Pak 40, it was selected for a design where the gun was not towed behind the RSO but put on top of it. For those that are unfamiliar with the Raupenschlepper Ost, a few words about it. This was a crucial vehicle for supplying the Ostfront. It was a conversion of a Steyr truck into a fully tracked vehicle. It was loud, rather slow, depending on the source and variant ranging from 14 km per hour to 30 km per hour. But it had overall good mobility in mud and snow, which is more important on the Eastern Front than speed. Additionally, it reused a lot of existing parts and was cheap to produce. Production started in 1942 and in total around 27,000 to 28,000 were produced during the war. As you can see, the regular Raupenschlepper Ost looks quite different from the Pak version. Major differences besides the mounted gun were that it was also lower and the driver's cabin was removed as well. Now there were certain requirements to be fulfilled. From 1943 to the end of the war, Waffentraeger 4, the Artillery Design Office, kept insisting that these Selbstfahrlafetten, self-propelled guns, have two features: 360-degree traverse for all-around fire and the gun to be dismountable for emplacements on the ground. And as you can see, this vehicle does not look very stable, so if you turn this gun by 90 degrees and fire, especially if you are not on level ground, you might assume it flips over. Hence one of the first trials was to fire this gun while turned 90 degrees to the side. This worked out. It is important to note that the original Raupenschlepper Ost was higher and the firing height was lower to 1.8 meters, which is 0.2 meters lower than those of some of the Marder tank destroyer variants. Although according to Kwok and Duske, the troops actually wanted a higher variant that would have protected some crew members. There was also a variant with the armored driver's cabin higher so that at least the sitting driver and co-driver were protected. However, the vehicle lost one of its greatest advantages, the low height of fire, and was rejected by Hitler, although the troop leaders, with the safety of the troops in mind, requested this version. So what was the result of the firing trials? The report was actually quite positive. For the first time, a successful trial has been completed with a gun mounted on a previously available chassis which has both all-around fire and can be dismounted. This design also has significant advantages for Pak 40 production because the gun with upper carriage can be used without modifications and some of the components that are difficult to acquire, such as wheels with rubber tires, axles, brakes and torsion bars, are no longer needed. Note that someone or several people in the German army were quite obsessed with dismountable vehicle guns, as you probably might know if you watched my video on the Wespe. Speaking of guns,
let us take a look at firepower and protection next. The gun was a 75mm pack with a barrel length of 46 calibers. Now, the elevation was -5 degrees to +14 degrees, and with a 360 traverse, be aware that this cover would be removed in combat. Now, for the ammunition, Jentz and Doyle note different numbers. At one point they note 28 shots in 7 bins, but in the technical overview they actually note 42 shots. So I'm not entirely sure. I've seen another source which also notes the 28mm, or the 28 shots. It could also be that this was the amount of ammunition that was carried on the vehicle, but the complete loader was 42 shots. I'm not entirely sure yet. Now, in terms of armor protection, there's not much going on here. As you can see, the gun shield is very small, similar to the Pak, but the Pak was usually dug in mostly. And the armor shield is 4.5mm 2 times, so there were 2 plates and it was spaced out. And here in front in the driver's cabin and the co-driver's cabin, although cabin might be a bit of an overstatement, I mean you have this part you can move up here, but well, it's 3mm of sheet metal, so no armor plate. So basically, besides the gun shields, there was absolutely no protection against small arms fire or fragments. So this was a very vulnerable vehicle.
Back to the report. It also listed the various benefits of the Raupenschlepper Ost with the Pak versus the towed Pak. First off, the crew. For the RSO was only 4, whereas for the towed Pak it was 8. Second, to achieve readiness to fire, the crew of the RSO Pak only needed to release the travel lock and then mount the gun sight. In contrast, the towed 7.5cm Pak 40 is ready to fire with a tired crew after the gun is uncoupled from the RSO, the tray spread, ready ammunition is unloaded from the Munitionsfahrzeug, the ammo carrier, and the RSO is driven into cover. Third, unsurprisingly for changing the position, this was rather similar. The RSO required only 2 major steps, namely dismounting the gun sight and engaging the travel lock, whereas the towed variant required to wait for the towing vehicle, etc. Fourth, when it came to gun traverse, the RSO featured 360 degree. Note that the top cover is detachable. In contrast, the Pak 40 had only a traverse of 65 degree. Fifth, in terms of mobility, the RSO Pak had a higher ground clearance, namely 550mm versus 250 of the Pak. Additionally, the 7.5cm Pak 40 of RSO is more mobile with lower ground pressure, can be turned within the vehicle's own length, can reverse for long stretches, climbs up to 70% slopes, and can cross any depth of snow. While a turning circle of 13.6 meter is necessary for the towed 7.5cm Pak 40, with a danger of damaging the trails by a smaller turning circle. Reversing is almost impossible. It can only climb up 40% slopes and get stuck in snow over 40 centimeters deep. Sixth, the next point, weight, is quite surprising. The RSO with the Pak mounted on it weighed actually less than the regular Pak gun. Note that it is not specified what actually went into the total weight, since another source notes that the combat weight of the Pak was 1,425 kg, whereas this report gives a total weight of 6,300 kg. I assume this includes the ammo, the 8-man crew, various equipment, etc. In contrast, the RSO with the mounted Pak has a weight of 5,400 kg, so 900 kg less. Although there was also a German wartime report that notes the weight of the Pak with 3,200 kg. This is related to the 7th point, namely production cost, since the Pak mounted on the RSO had less components and thus would also be cheaper and easier and faster to produce. Keep in mind this only refers to the gun, not the whole vehicle. As such, the project was approved in September 1943. Although, remember the initial requirements with 360-degree traverse and a dismountable gun? Well, these requirements were also the same for the self-propelled artillery, and although they sounded great on paper, their feasibility and effectiveness in real life was limited. Additionally, it overcomplicated the design. The request was as follows. It is requested that broad-based troop trials are conducted on the Eastern Front in the Panzerjaeger-Abteilungen, in the Infanteriedivisionen, and that 50 be ordered for this purpose. This requires 1. A dismounting device for each gun, and 2. The dismounted guns must be movable for short stretches. The basis for this request is A. Firing positions can be changed without remounting the gun, B. The gun can be quickly pulled out of enemy fire and then remounted under cover, C. In case the RSO is lost, the gun can be expediently towed by another RSO. Major problems here are if the gun can be dismounted and moved, this requires wheels, and also equipment like a crane for dismounting and remounting. As such, the lower weight as previously reported is completely out of the window. Additionally, to move the gun, your foreman crew probably is not sufficient anymore. But where do you put the other guys? Maybe I'm missing something here, but I can see how this could work. Similarly, Jentz and Doyle note, this requirement to dismount the gun is not understood. The main advantage appears to be that the gun could still be kept in action when the vehicle broke down. But couldn't the same objective have been met simply by placing the 7.5 cm Pak 40 with its original wheeled carriage on an unmodified RSO, just like the British mounted their 2 and 6-pounder anti-tank guns per T on trucks? Meanwhile, in October 1943, Hitler was very happy with the design and ordered that preparations are to be made to produce 400 a month. In November, it was then noted that design changes were necessary. 2 RSO are needed for each Pak 40 of RSO, one for the gun and the other for the equipment, crane, towing device, etc. Ammunition and part of the crew that can't ride on the first RSO. It should be possible to achieve all this with one RSO. Then the Pak would have to be towed in winter on a sled and in summer on a small trailer. The advantage of using 2 RSO is that if one vehicle is lost, the Pak can be dismounted from the RSO or trailer. But general problems with the crane were reported. Still, Hitler was very interested in the vehicle and the results of the driving trials. Finally, troop trials began in January 1944. In March 1944, the report from the troop trials came in. It was noted positively the increase in mobile anti-tank guns and the large traverse of the gun. Yet the poor protection for the crews resulted in high losses due to shell fragments. Additionally, second, and placed in defensive positions, it has the advantage of a large traverse. The disadvantages are that it is impossible to quickly change firing positions, impossible to change position, and the gun is lost when the vehicle is lost. Proposed modifications include all-around fragment protection for the crew, mount the gun on a stronger vehicle, and mount wheels on the gun so that it can be towed expediently. Needless to say, this did not really work out. According to one source, the RSO Pak earned their nickname, namely Rollender Sarg Ost, Rolling Coffin East. In June 1944, the project was dropped with the following reasoning. The main deficiencies are that it presents too large an armored target, is too slow, and the RSO is overloaded. Therefore, Hitler has decided the production of the 7.5 cm Pak 40 of RSO will cease after all the previously contracted number have been delivered. Another criterion not listed here probably was that the vehicle was very noisy. I found an experience report by the 23rd Infantry Division from summer 1943 about anti-tank combat. It had an additional statement about the various towing vehicles attached. The part for the regular Raupenschlepper Ost, so the one without the mounted gun, noted the following. The RSO as a means of towing the guns is too noisy. Long before reaching the gun position, its appearance is detected by the enemy side. According to Andorfer et al., this was also not a single instance. They note, in official reports the vehicle was sometimes called Austria's Revenge, or blatant Licher, lärmender Kriecher, which meant a damn slow chap or a lame duck. Also comparisons with Propaganda Minister Dr. Goebbels like loud but with no substance were not uncommon. As such, this particular vehicle only saw a production of about 60, which were from the production for the troop trial.
Well, I hope you like this look at the Raupenschlepper Ost pack. Big thank you to the Panzermuseum Munster for making this video possible. Special thanks to Andrew for reviewing the script. Also special thanks to all my Patreon subscribers and supporters for making trips like this possible. As always, sources listed in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.